Réagir, s'il vous plaît. L'idéal serait que tout le monde ici, le panel, reçoive une question. Que chacun des membres du panel réponde à au moins une question. Allez-y, Madame Kharouni. Ah non, 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 il faut, voilà, faut que chacun prenne note. Chacun aura la latitude de répondre. D'autres questions, s'il vous plaît? Une pour professeur Hamid Ndiane. Il ne faut pas le laisser le pauvre comme ça. Oui, tu vois, oui, d'accord. Plus d'un tour dans son sac. Allez-y, madame. Kendouzi, c'est sûr.
So here, thank you for your intervention. So here it seems full of passion. So here we felt that you are really a great lover of literature. But here my question is that from what I have understood is that there is a kind of focus on empathy, or what is Aristotle calls pathos. Okay? Here you said that, if I have understood, you refer to Michel Foucault, who said that school is a kind of prison, so to enslave the pupil and the students, etc., by trying to feedback them with knowledge, etc. So it comes also from the Romantic era, when people say that, why not we let our kids to learn from nature, etc., without bothering them, going to school and trying to supervise their homeworks, etc. So here, I think that, don't you think that it's very important to think about the logos? When we give a lesson for a student, there is an interaction. It doesn't mean that there is this relation of the master and the slave. So otherwise, the slave will never rebel. So here we have this notion of logos. So when we are, of course, instructed something, for sure that we are going to think it, meaning that we are going to think about this. So for Aristotle, we have, of course, this empathy mainly when he speaks about tragedy. Okay, he said that there is catharsis, etc. But at the same time, some critics think that all the writings of Aristotle are kind of myth here because he's not too much realistic. Since there is a kind of reason, so at least a small parcel in reason, mainly when he speaks about rhetoric, saying that in rhetoric, which is for him very important, is maybe he's the only one who think that rhetoric is something neutral. It can be used for good and it can be used for ill. So it's this part of logos that permits us, in fact, to distinguish between what is good and what is bad. Thank you.
Thank you very much. شفا مرحبا بك شفا. Deux en un, quoi.
Thank you for your questions. I'm happy that my presentation has triggered such interest. Maybe I have not taken much time to conclude, because I would have reshaped. You have noticed how I have presented. It means through definitions and asking questions, but I would have reshaped my presentation in other way. And I would have reminded the audience about what is at stake, what is the issue actually. Let me remind it in other words now. The idea of educating the citizen is controversial. And civic education is born in the modern... No. It will be brief, believe me. Believe me, because all conclusions are brief, actually. Okay. Including civic education since what's called from the French Revolution, okay, we tend to emphasize the idea of civicus, that is, of the citizens, as opposed to the religious. There is the idea here of democracy indeed. This joins the first question. And this led to to put aside, sideline, narratives, traditional narratives, mostly religious, mostly related to myth. At the same time, when we put aside this aspect, education became, especially from in the beginning of the 20th century until the end of almost the end of the 20th century, all education has become a form of violence. Un dressage comme dit, un domestication et un dressage comme le dit Derrida. How to overcome this? That was the issue. Si on parle de recherche, ce n'est pas l'enseignant qui parle, je pose ce problème. We have to return back to the literature because literature works through identification and distanciation. And it is through this that we socialize individuals. Literature can be used to many other functions. Okay, one of them is critical thinking, intercultural tolerance, etc. I didn't speak about this. Had I done this, I would have spoken about rhetoric, logos, as Unisa has just said now. Okay. So I retained only that what was relevant to civic education. Now civic education. You speak about violence in the comedy. Yes, but this is not the violence I'm speaking about. I'm speaking about the violence in the process of educating. Okay? And now you speak about Shakespeare violence. His society was violent, therefore it was one of the norms of society. When Hamlet or Macbeth aspires for power and Hamlet revenge, this is part of their culture and they were socialized in this way. Now what is our culture? I finish with this. Our culture, you cannot socialize an individual with the literature which belongs to the previous ages. You always socialize with the literature of his time. Our children identify more with, for example, Omar in La Grande Maison than with Gavroche, for example, or I don't know, any medieval character. This is one. Now, in foreign context, you do not socialize in English as a foreign language. No, we do not call this a socialization. In English as a foreign language, you acquire a competence which is called intercultural, but it's not socialization. Socializing is linked to your society. Therefore, if you want to socialize our learners, to teach them, for example, civic education, aspect related to respect of environment and nature, etc., try to find in our literature, be it, as I said, written literature such as Algerian novels or Algerian folk tales, which teach them this indirectly, because in literature everything goes implicit without this explicitness which is the source of violence. Now, to respond to the first question and I finish, I said from the beginning that civic education was born out of the French Revolution. Therefore, French Revolution was for more human rights. It does not necessarily, it implies that doesn't work in, as what you have called authoritarian regimes, because here, when you have an authoritarian regime, you do not have a citizen, you have a subject. Therefore, there is no civic education, though it is manipulated, etc. And please do not speak about liberal democracies. Better stop at democracies, because liberal is one form of democracy. Okay? And maybe it's not Algerian democracy, or it does not relate to the non-Western world. So that's all. Okay? Thank you.
I would just like to add something about your question about democracy and in an authoritarian regime. How could we speak about democracy in an authoritarian regime? I would like to answer the question as concerns the didactics. In other words, the programs and the approaches we have in our country. Okay, and how could we insert this way of teaching, these programs in our country? Is there any contradiction? I would just like to to put some, to add some precisions about the approach and the program. We were used to teach within a teacher-centered approaches, okay? In other words, the teacher is in the classroom as a model, and he is there to provide knowledge to the learner who is knowledge receiver. But with the CBA, in the educational program, the CBA is a learner-centered approach. In other words, the teacher is no more the model. The teacher is not there to teach. He is there to help the learners learn. Since the learner is there to learn individually. In other words, the teacher's role is to help the learners construct himself by being at his or her side while trying to learn the language and at the same time to learn more than the language. Because within the CBA, we are no more focusing on the language itself, the language being just a means to an end, the end being to be constructed within as a future citizen of the country. In other words, the notion of democracy is put aside. Be it democratic or not, the teacher in the classroom, if he follows the CBA, he becomes free to follow the learner's way of constructing themselves. Now, of course, if we enter politics, it's another domain. But as didactics, freedom is left for the teacher. More than that, even though he may, from time to time, be authoritarian in front of the learners, most of the time he has just to be a guide. In other words, to help the learners live. Because we said in the classroom should resemble the word. It should look like the word. And they have to meet with problems they meet in everyday life. And they have to take positions according to the problems they live in their everyday life. In other words, we are completely away from the perspective you asked about.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, that's my turn now. So I try to join the two questions that I have received. So one was mainly focusing on the word democracy as the concept that I have never uttered in my talk or presented it in my PowerPoint. You know that democracy is a part in civic education, but since my population that I wanted to work on, they are still teenagers, 18, and for that I have focused on the citizenship. Purposefully, I did it because I don't want to keep aloof what is my first purpose as a syllabus design. Throughout this my presentation, I did not limit myself to talk about an EFL class, but I have focused on the syllabus designer's position when making out a file. The first purpose is to teach English. Teaching English from a linguistic point of view, we have to equip our Algerian learners and pupils in order to get a good writing, to get a good oral discourse. Through this discourse or the writing production, we have to select a theme. It could be very efficacious if we are going to select this time civic education. And they have put between inverted commas what is a good citizenship. talking about the self-reliance, talking about the values in the society, talking about the duties that they have to accomplish before the rights that they have to claim. So democracy as a concept is kept aloof, not to neglect it, but it is partially a concept that has to be discussed at the university. I have chosen third year. Why third year? Because I have said here the learners are acquiring a maturity in the knowledge, as well as I joined it in their linguistic input in the target language. The amalgam that exists between these two components that are comprising linguistic and non-linguistic issues would form our Algerian learners to embrace the tertiary level with the concepts that they are going to develop them in the module of civilization, because we are in English department, so we can prepare them for this, or even if they are embracing another field, they can have acquaintances. So talking about political program, about authoritarian regime, for these syllabus designers, they will deviate completely about the essence, the core of the aims of what a syllabus must be. We have, to split the file into dimensions. Always we have to develop the 4 skills. We have to get always grammar, pronunciation, for instance, cultural aspect, in order to give an entire, making out of the file and preparing the learners in order to be good language users of English here in our domain. The deviation in my talk, I did not represent it by the word democracy and to overload the file with these words that are going to let, learners to interpret them not in the context of history of civilization, but from the language. In my talk, and the position that I was getting at that time was about the syllabus design. What I have said in my conclusion, it is right that needs this preparation colossal endeavors. So the file becomes without any soul, because the file is only representing a linguistic input. Once it is plunged in the class, who is in the class? The teacher and the learners. They have got this commitment in their engagement of the task, teaching and the learning. Now, who is going to teach? The teacher. Who is the teacher? He is a person, and he holds many other parameters. So, if the message is sent through a text, and one, I would say, I don't know her name because she did not prepare, about the literary text to develop. For Mr. Gendouzi, she was talking about this intervention. I would answer when the text is included in a file. It will have different dimensions, how it is going to be decoded by the teacher, encoded by the learner. I would say the task of the teacher while decoding doesn't mean that is totally grasped as it has been transmitted by the teacher. And the teacher as a person has got another position that might be, I would say, different from the text that we have, to discuss it with our students. So here we have to keep, a barrier from deviating from EFL class and to go just for democracy and the concepts that need discussion even at the tertiary level. Because in civilization, students, they are more mature and they can debate, and not what the teacher says or what the program dictates is going to be swallowed. This is the aim. This is to finish with the critical thinking that I have pointed it out. Thank you very much.
Merci, madame. Puisque madame, docteur Maouch, elle est revenue, est-ce qu'il y a quelqu'un qui voudrait lui poser une question plus particulièrement avant de clôturer cette première plénière matinale, s'il vous plaît. C'est bon. Donc, je vous dis, cette plénière arrive à son terme. Donc, on est obligé de partir et de revenir dans les workshops. Vous devez consulter les différents workshops. Il y aura des communications. Je vous remercie pour votre écoute et j'espère que tout le monde a au moins pu tirer un profit ou compris certaines choses relevant de cette problématique essentielle et capitale qui est l'éducation civique ou le civisme ou l'éducation laïque ou tout ce qui gravite autour de ce concept qui aujourd'hui représente la tendance, une sorte de tendance mondiale à l'intérieur d'une globalisation envahissante et qui arrive à forcer les portes et les frontières et qui nous pose un challenge essentiel pour l'avenir des générations et surtout cette notion de responsabilité envers la collectivité. Je vous dis au revoir et je vous remercie. Je remercie les membres du panel d'avoir, par leur contribution, suscité un débat et permis à tout un chacun de nous, dans la mesure du possible, d'apporter sa petite pierre à l'édifice. Voilà.
Merci, professeur Kskes. Merci à tous les participants, professeur Gendouzi, professeur Améziane, docteur Lahiwil Azza. Merci moi-même aussi. Donc, on se reverra cet après-midi pour les workshops, les ateliers qui se dérouleront dans des salles. Quel bloc Bloc 2. Il y aura aussi un atelier à l'auditorium. Donc, sans plus tarder, pardon. Merci beaucoup.